Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tea Time with Eddie. It is once again another sort of chilly day here in Wisconsin. The date is March 11th, 2017. It's actually rather interesting because the fluctuation of weather patterns, particularly in this area of the planet, which is in the Midwest of America, can be rather dramatic. Not too long ago, a couple weeks ago, we had spurts of weather that went on to 70 degrees, but now it is 30 degrees. And the fluctuations are, I suppose, kind of what makes the hardiness of this land have a certain quality to it. And I suppose the hardiness of its people, at least if you are able to somewhat immerse yourself within the change and have these rapid, somewhat outer changes of the weather inspire you to have a greater level of core strength, in which you are able to allow essentially the myriads of forms of appearance to transpire, and not allow these myriads of forms of appearance to dictate the nature of your self-identity. This is, of course, like one possible yoga that you could extract from living in a land such as that, which is rather practical in my particular circumstances. But with that being said, though, this is just one representation of the infinite number of forms and situations in which these forms appear and disappear on all different levels within perception. And so, although I can state that I live in a land in which weather can literally change by 50 degrees in one day, or even less than one day, 50 degrees Fahrenheit that is, that is rather insignificant compared to the level of fluctuations that occur within one's mind stream, and the things that will arise within one's mind stream, the fluctuations of emotions that one can experience. Such things can be just as dramatic and have a feeling within perception of being just as real, just as palpable. And with that being said, one can see these fluctuations that occur within perception, within one's individual interpretation of phenomena. One can notice these tendencies to interpret things as good or bad, and have, as a result of these interpretations, feel somewhat justified to go into various extremes. One can notice these tendencies, and there is a quality within this noticing of awareness. You can feel at a particular point within this awareness the choice to actually enter into the next series of elaborations. The key is to identify this period where you have somewhat of a definitive choice. And this comes through mind training. This comes through meditation and reflection, whatever forms you wish to use. And although there are many methods to do this, they all have this similar quality of the necessity for awareness. And when this happens, you will realize that events can transpire. The world can unfold in front of you without necessarily quantifying it as good or bad, or more or less, or a benefit to an inherently existent self, or not an inherently existent self. And when you realize this, there is actually an incredible freedom and elation. And this can be described as a genuine experience of non-duality. Once again, the methods to attain this genuine experience are as infinite as there are formations of phenomena that you can perceive. But there is a similarity of experiencing this feeling of the fundamental ground, of a feeling of this base, in the fact that given the nature of appearance as it seemingly being solid, you can infer through analysis that this appearance isn't inherently solid. And when you understand this baseless nature of phenomena, all of a sudden all things are tied together in this beautiful, intricate oneness that is not mundane in any way, and expresses itself through the spontaneity of compassionate action. With that being said, it is just a matter of just constantly recollecting yourself, recollecting your awareness in all instances. And if it seems monotonous to think, I shall do this moment by moment, day by day, then you're not necessarily really paying attention to the actual moment when you feel this sense of monotony. Because if you really attempt to have this level of awareness, it won't suddenly appear monotonous. And even activities that you can infer through past interpretations that were once monotonous no longer actually are, because the reality is this myriad of form, constantly evolving, yet also tied together in this incredible oneness. And so this is the desire realm. In Buddhist cosmology, it's known as the Saha universe. And in the Saha universe, there is always this feeling of a certain level of difficulty that you really cannot escape if you have the condition of being born within this universe. And this is not necessarily a difficulty that is not experienced by an enlightened being. It's just their interpretation of it is more advanced. It is allowed to be experienced without really giving or taking away from it. For instance, within the Buddhist cosmological perspective, but also very practically within the historic perspective, you can say that the last uncontested enlightened being, accepted by most people on this planet, although there is definitely, if once you get deeper within the Buddhist sort of like historical context, the historical legacy of the Buddhist teachings, there are other examples of uncontested enlightened beings after this one whom I'm going to mention, but the one that is most well known would be Buddha Shakyamuni, whom lived about 2,600 years ago. And even though he had perfectly enlightened qualities, which actually have been covered in depth if one really wishes to research the qualities that were written down and translated and retranslated, and what we can eventually read at this point in the English language, as well as, of course, Tibetan and Sanskrit and Pali, is even though he had all of these numerous enlightened qualities that can be identified from just the shape of his fingernails up into, of course, the nature of his realization, which is the most important thing, even at the time of his death, he displayed the disintegration of his body and the sort of like the fact that, this quality of his organs failing and the feeling of sickness was something that he was not escaping from. This was something that he manifested as well. And from his perspective, it was not necessarily like a true feeling of like an inherent suffering, because suffering, the suffering that truly is harmful, he had conquered through the perfect wisdom. But he still manifested these difficulties, and that was a representation of the fact that while you are in this universe of the desire realm, of the Saha universe, there is going to be slight feelings of difficulties that you experience along the way. And this is why both it can be a place of great spiritual growth and also of great suffering, and they exist on independence on each other, which is a really interesting thing, an interesting sort of like mystical but also very pragmatic truth of reality to meditate upon, that things exist only on dependence of their corresponding parts. And so, the desire realm in general. It's something that, of course, there's not enough time to really talk about, but in future episodes, I think it would be a very practical thing to talk about even more in depth. But there is this desire realm. There is a very strong pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain simultaneously. The pleasure is seen as a very strong tendency to see this attainment of pleasure as true happiness. And there is also a very strong tendency to see the experience of pain as true suffering. And basically, if you kind of keep yourself within this view set, you're not necessarily looking at the true causes of your unhappiness. And this propels you to be what is known as the cycle of suffering, samsara, essentially. The thing is, though, since in the desire realm, there is this pervasive feeling of uncomfortability at times, this slight feeling of being, this slight feeling of impurity, this actually compels one to develop one's precious human life to the point where you can experience all of this uncomfortability and suffering and not feel as if they are permanent entities, not feel as if they don't have causes and conditions. And from a somewhat more like mystical objective perspective, if you were to imagine somewhat more of a paradise-like atmosphere in which the suffering of birth, old age, and sickness and death was very hard to perceive, there would not be this kind of inspiration to enhance oneself. And so, with that being said, the desire realm poses certain opportunities to enhance oneself. And when it comes to taking advantage of these opportunities, I believe I'll get into those sort of advantageous situations as time goes on. But just understand, I suppose, the fact that if you are here and now within perception, take some time to smell the mental roses and realize that the difficulties you have are actually incredible opportunities. And have somewhat of a reasoned faith that even though the possibility to transform these difficulties into realization may not be apparent at the moment, have reasoned faith that the potential is there and hold on to that as an alternative to holding on to the inherent existence of pleasure and pain. And allow things to transpire without as much attachment to them. And the more you do this, the more easy it will be, and the more capable you will become for skillful action. Anyways, thank you for joining me for another episode of Tea Time with Eddie. May the fluctuations of the weather in the most violent ecosystems in the world be as a peaceful glen filled with the right sunshine, food and water and fresh air within your meditative contemplation.